Snow on the high pass, mile after mile of it, white and silent, and without mercy, sealing a valley off from the rest of the living world. Down through that valley, a river runs black between the pines. Follow it, past the great timber house with gold light in its windows, past the barns and the mills, up the stairs to a single room where one candle burns against the dark. A woman sits beside a bed, in her hand a silver spoon, and on that spoon where it touched her husband's medicine, a stain has bloomed, black, ugly, wrong. She has been told he is dying of the cold in his gut. She no longer believes it. Somewhere below her, a floorboard creaks under a careful foot. A voice she trusted calls good night, warm as sunrise. She looks at the stain. She looks at the door. And she understands all at once that the most dangerous man in this house is the one who smiles the most. The wagon hit another rut in the road, and Adeline Calloway bit down hard to keep from crying out. 3 days now. 3 days of frozen ground and a driver who did not speak. 3 days of watching the prairie give way to foothills. The foothills give way to mountains, the mountains rising up around her like the walls of some great green prison, closing shut. She pressed her gloved hand flat against the small leather case in her lap. Everything she owned in the world fit inside it. A change of clothes, a Bible with her mother's handwriting in the margins, a letter folded so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth, the letter that had brought her here. She did not need to read it again. She knew every word. She had read it 100 times in the boarding house in St. Louis, by candlelight, the night before she sold her mother's wedding ring to pay for the stagecoach fare. Mr. Holt Brennan of Hollow Pine, Montana Territory seeks a wife of good character, a working partner, a woman not afraid of hard winters or hard work. That was all it had said, plain. No promises, no pretty words. And somehow that plainness had been the thing that made her trust it, because the men who used pretty words, she had known a few of those. Her father had been one. God rest him. God rest the kind of man who could charm a banker out of $300 and then drink it all before the snow melted, leaving his only daughter to answer for the debt when the fever finally took him. $300. That number had become a living thing. It followed her down every street in St. Louis. It sat across from her at every supper she could no longer afford. It whispered to her at night in the voice of Mr. Tate from the bank, who had looked at her over his spectacles and said there were ways a young woman could settle a debt like this, ways that did not require money. She had left the next morning. The driver pulled the horses up short. "Hollow Pine," he said, "first and last word of the journey. Down that way." Adeline looked, and her breath caught somewhere behind her ribs. A valley, cupped between two ridges like water held in two hands. Pine so dark it looked almost black against the snow. A river threading silver through the middle of it. And smoke. Smoke rising from a scattering of buildings far below, small as a child's toys from up here. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was the rest of her life. She climbed down on legs that had forgotten how to be legs. The driver handed down her case without a word, clicked his tongue, and the wagon was gone before she had finished smoothing her skirts. Gone back the way they had come, back toward the world she had left, leaving her standing alone on a frozen road in a borrowed coat at the top of a valley she had never seen, waiting for a man she had never met, a man who had not come. She waited an hour. The cold worked its way up through the soles of her boots and into her knees. The light began to slant and go golden, the way light does in the mountains just before it abandons you to the dark. She had begun to do the arithmetic of fear. How far back to the last town? Whether she could walk it? What she would do when she could not? And that was when she heard the hooves. A single rider coming up the valley road, not hurrying. A man on a tall bay horse, broad through the shoulders, sitting the saddle like he had been born there. He wore a long oilskin coat and a hat pulled low, and the last of the sun was behind him, so she could not see his face, only the shape of him, big, unhurried. Her heart did a foolish thing. It hoped. The rider drew up a few yards off, touched his hat brim, and when he spoke his voice was warm and easy and full of apology. "Miss Calloway, Lord, look at you half froze. I am so sorry. Truly. The whole household's been at 6s and 7s. Not the voice she had expected. She did not know what she had expected, but not this. Bright, quick, a smile in it. "You are Mr. Brennan?" she asked. Something flickered across his face, just for a moment. Then the smile came back wider. "I'm Asa," he said. "Asa Brennan, Holt's the eldest. I'm the youngest of us 3. He swung down from the saddle and crossed to take her case, and up close she could see he was young, younger than she'd imagined, with an open, boyish face and warm brown eyes. "Holt sent me up to fetch you. Well, he's a man of few words, my brother. Sometimes I think he forgets the rest of the world needs more than 2. Adeline did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Asa laughed as if she had. "Come on, let's get you down to the house before you turn to ice. You'll like it. Hetty's got a fire going and a supper on. We've all been wanting to meet the woman brave enough to answer that sorry excuse for a letter." He helped her up onto the horse behind the saddle, and she held to the back of his coat as they wound down into the valley. He talked the whole way, about the weather, about the timber, about how Hollow Pine got its name. He was charming, he was kind, and some small, cold part of her, the part that had survived St. Louis, the part that had learned to read men the way a sailor reads a sky, that part of her took note, that he had hesitated when she said his brother's name, that his eyes had moved once the way a man's eyes move when he is deciding what to leave out. She told that part of herself to be quiet. She was tired. She was cold. She was imagining things. She had no idea yet how long she would wish she had listened. The Brennan place was bigger than anything she had pictured. A great 2-story house of squared timber with a stone chimney at each end and lamplight already glowing gold in the windows. Barns beyond it, a bunkhouse, pens and corrals, and the long, low shapes of mills and sheds running down toward the river. Stacks of cut timber stood taller than the house, pale and ghostly in the dusk. This was not a homestead. This was an empire, carved out of the wilderness by hand. Asa swung her down at the front steps just as the door opened and a woman came out wiping her hands on her apron. Older, gray hair pinned tight, a face that had seen a great deal and decided to keep most of its opinions to itself. "So you're her," the woman said. Looked Adeline up and down, not unkindly, just thorough. "I'm Hetty. I keep this house from falling into the river. You'll be wanting hot water and hotter food in that order, and you'll get both. Come in out of the dark." "Thank you," Adeline said, and meant it more than the words could carry. The inside of the house was warm, blessedly, achingly warm. A wide front room with a fire roaring in the great stone hearth, worn leather chairs, a long plank table, and books. That surprised her. Books everywhere, on shelves on the mantel, stacked on the floor by the chairs. A man stood by the fire. He had his back half to her, one hand braced on the mantel, looking down into the flames. Tall, taller than Asa, broad across the back in a way that spoke of years of work, real work, the kind that builds a body the way weather builds a mountain. Dark hair a little long, a plain wool shirt. He turned, and Adeline forgot for a moment how to breathe. It was not that he was handsome, though he was. It was the stillness of him. Asa filled a room with words and motion. This man filled it just by standing there. His face was weathered, a hard jaw shadowed with a few days of beard, and his eyes, when they found hers, were the color of strong coffee and gave away absolutely nothing. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back, chin up. She had decided somewhere on the road that whatever else happened, she would not arrive looking afraid. "Mr. Brennan," she said. "Miss Calloway." His voice was low, quiet, each word set down careful, like a man laying stones. "You had a long way to come." "I did. You could have turned back. Plenty do." "I am not plenty," she said. Something moved in his face. Not a smile, the distant cousin of one. He studied her another moment, and she had the strangest sense of being weighed the way he might weigh a horse or a season or a risk. Then he looked away back to the fire, and the moment was gone. "Hetty will see to you," he said. "We'll talk in the morning." That was all. He crossed the room and went out the door into the dark, pulling on his coat as he went, and the cold came in for just a second before the door shut behind him. Adeline stood there in the warm room with her case in her hand and her heart somewhere down around her frozen boots. Asa cleared his throat. He had been leaning in the doorway watching the whole thing, and now he gave her a look that was half apology and half something else she could not name. "Like I said," he murmured. Few words. A third man came down the stairs. She had not heard him. That was the first thing she noticed. A big man near as big as Holt, moving quiet as smoke. He stopped on the bottom step and looked at her, and where Asa's face was open and Holt's was closed, this one's was simply still, watchful. A face that was used to standing back and seeing things. "This is Ford," Asa said. "Crawford, the middle one. Don't mind him, he doesn't talk much either. I got all the words in this family. Somebody had to." "Ma'am," Ford said. One word, a nod. Then he too pulled on a coat and went out into the dark after his eldest brother, and Adeline was left with Hetty and the fire, and the strange dawning understanding that she had married into a house full of silences. She did not sleep much that first night. Hetty had given her a room at the top of the stairs, clean, plain, a bed with a good quilt, a washstand, a window that looked out over the dark shapes of the mills toward the river. The water Hetty brought was hot, and the soup was thick, and Adeline ate every drop of it, and felt for the first time in longer than she could remember the small animal comfort of being warm and fed and behind a locked door. But sleep would not come. She lay in the dark and listened to the house, the settle and tick of it, the wind working at the eaves. Somewhere late, the front door opening and closing low voices' boots on the stairs. The brothers coming in. She thought about the man by the fire. He had not wanted her. That much was plain. He had answered the letter and sent the fare and gone through with the wedding. That would happen, she supposed, soon, because a man like that kept his word, even when his word had become a burden to him. But he had not wanted her. He had looked at her the way a man looks at a debt he has agreed to pay. And was that not, she thought, exactly what she was? A debt, settled the only way left to her. She had not come here for love. She had told herself that firmly in St. Louis, the way you tell a child a hard truth. She had come here for safety, for a roof, for a name that was not attached to $300, and Mr. Tate's spectacles, and the things he had said. Love was for women with choices. She had no choices. She had a locked door, and a warm quilt, and a man downstairs who did not want her. It would be enough. It would have to be. The wedding happened 2 days later. There was no church in Hollow Pine, not yet only a circuit preacher who came through once a month and happened to be passing. They stood on the front porch of the house in the cold, bright morning, Adeline in her one good dress, Holt in a clean shirt that strained across his shoulders, and the preacher read the words out fast because his fingers were going numb. Hetty cried. Asa grinned. Ford stood at the back with his hat in his hands and watched everything. When the preacher said the part about man and wife, Holt looked at her, really looked for the first time since that first night by the fire. And for just a moment, in the bright, cold light, she thought she saw something behind the coffee-dark eyes. Something tired. Something that had been hurt a long time ago and had built a wall around the wound and forgotten there was anything behind it. Then he bent and kissed her. Brief, careful, his lips barely brushing hers the way you might kiss a stranger's hand. And it was over. They were married. That evening, after the supper and the toasts and Asa's 3 separate attempts to make his brother laugh, Holt walked her up the stairs. To her door. Not his. Hers. He stood there a moment in the dim hall, this great quiet man, and she could see he was choosing words and finding none that fit. "This is your room," he said finally. "It will stay your room, as long as you want it." Adeline did not understand. "I made you no promises in that letter," he went on. His voice was very low. "I will not make you keep any you did not offer. You have a lock on that door. Use it if you like." He paused. "I sleep down the hall. You will not be troubled." And then she understood. And something in her chest, some hard frozen thing she had carried all the way from St. Louis, cracked clean down the middle, because she had braced for the opposite. She had lain awake on the stagecoach, steeling herself for the wedding night the way a soldier steels for a charge. She had told herself she could endure it, that she had endured worse or nearly, that it was the price. And here was this silent, unwilling man, this man who did not want her telling her she would not have to pay it. She did not know what to say, so she said the truest thing she had. "Thank you." He nodded, just once, and went down the hall to his own room and shut his own door, and Adeline went into hers and sat down on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands, not from sorrow, from the sheer terrible relief of being for the first time in a year somewhere safe. She did not lock the door. She thought about it. Her hand was on the bolt. And then she thought about the man down the hall who had given her the choice, and she left the bolt where it was, and she slept that night the way the dead must sleep, deep, dreamless, whole. In the morning, she went down to learn how to be a Brennan. She had expected to be useless. That was the shameful secret she had carried. She was a banker's daughter raised in town with soft hands and a head full of poetry and not one practical skill to her name. She could keep accounts. She could read 3 languages badly. She could play a passable hymn on a piano she no longer owned. None of that mended a fence or fed a stove or kept 30 men in a timber camp from starving. But she could learn. And she discovered those first weeks that learning was a thing she was hungry for in a way she had not known. Hetty taught her the kitchen, the great black stove with its moods and its temperatures, how to judge a fire by its color, how to make bread rise in a cold house, how to stretch a haunch of venison across a week, how to put up the last of the autumn vegetables in the root cellar so they would last till spring. Adeline burned 3 loaves and cried over the 4th, and Hetty just handed her more flour and said nothing, which was its own kind of kindness. Ford taught her the animals, though he did it sideways, never quite saying he was teaching her. She would find him at the barn and just watch. And after a while, he would grunt and hand her the bucket, or show her with his hands the right way to grip the right way, to stand near a nervous horse so it did not spook. He almost never spoke, but he was patient in a way that words could not have been. When she got something right, he would give the smallest nod, and she found herself working for those nods like a child works for a gold star. And Asa was everywhere. Asa told her stories. Asa made her laugh when she had not laughed in a year, leaning on the corral fence, spinning some tall tale about the time Holt wrestled a bear, or the winter the snow came up past the second-floor windows, or the prospector who swore there was a city of gold under the mountain. He was easy to be around. He was the brightness in that house of silences. It was Asa who told her about their father. They were shelling beans by the fire, the two of them, an ordinary evening, and she had asked in the way you ask how long the 3 of them had run the place alone. Asa's hand slowed. 2 years, he said. Pa passed 2 winters back. I'm sorry, Adeline said. Was he ill long? That's the strange part. Asa frowned down at the beans. He wasn't ill at all. Strongest man I ever knew. Pa Brennan could fell a tree at 60 that 2 younger men couldn't budge. Never sick a day. And then one winter he spread his hands. Started fading. Belly pains. Couldn't keep food down. Got thinner and thinner. Doc Larkin came up from town and gave him tonics and called it a stomach complaint and said it was the cold getting into an old man's gut. He shook his head. Took him about 6 weeks. He just wasted clean away. Strongest man I ever knew. The fire popped. Adeline looked at the beans in her lap and did not, for reasons she could not have named, look up. "That must have been very hard," she said. "It was." Ace's voice had gone quiet, lost its brightness. Then he shook himself, and the brightness came back like a lamp turned up. "Anyway, that's why this place runs the way it does. 3 of us splitting what one old man used to carry. Holt took it hardest. He was always Pa's favorite. Took over the whole thing without a word like he does." A small laugh. "You'll get used to him. Underneath all that quiet, there's a good man. Best of us, probably. He just buried himself along with Pa, and he hasn't finished digging back out." Adeline nodded and put the conversation away in the back of her mind the way you put away a thing you do not yet know is important. A strong man, never sick a day, wasted away in 6 weeks. A stomach complaint, the cold getting into an old man's gut. She had no reason to think anything of it, none at all. It would be weeks before she understood that the answer to everything had been spoken to her over a bowl of beans by the firelight, in the easy voice of the brother who smiled the most. What she did notice in those weeks was the town. She had to go in eventually. Hetty needed thread and sugar and a list of things the house could not make for itself, and one bright frozen morning, Holt hitched the wagon and drove her in himself, the 2 of them sitting side by side on the bench, with a blanket over their knees, and a silence between them that was, she was beginning to learn, not unfriendly. Just his way. He pointed things out now and then. The boundary of Brennan land, the place where a creek crossed the road. He had a way of saying a great deal with very little, and she was learning to hear it. Hollow Pine was one street, a general store, a church being built, the frame of it raw and yellow against the snow, a blacksmith, a few houses, the kind of town that was still deciding whether it would grow into something or simply blow away. She felt the eyes the moment she stepped down from the wagon. Women on the boardwalk, stopping, looking, heads bending together. She knew that look. She had worn the receiving end of that look in St. Louis after her father died after the talk started. The look that measures you and finds you wanting, and is generous enough to share the verdict with the neighbors. A woman came out of the general store. Handsome, well-dressed, a fox fur about her shoulders that had no business in a town this poor. She had the bearing of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room she entered, and the look she gave Adeline was sharp as a pin. "You'll be the Brennan bride," the woman said, loud enough for the boardwalk. "The mail order one." "I am Mrs. Brennan, yes," Adeline said. A few of the women tittered. "Mrs. Pruitt," the woman said, not offering her hand. Her husband Adeline would learn owned the store and a good deal else besides, and Mrs. Pruitt owned the town's opinion of itself. "We do so wonder, you know, about girls like you, whether it's the man you came for or the timber." A thin smile. "Holt Brennan's the richest man in this valley. A girl with nothing to her name could do worse than answer a letter, couldn't she? Whatever her character." The boardwalk went quiet the way a room goes quiet when it scents blood. Adeline felt the old heat climb her neck. The shame she had carried out of St. Louis. The shame of being a woman alone, a woman with debts. A woman who could be talked about like this in the open street and could not strike back, because to strike back was to prove the talk had landed. She thought of Holt sitting in the wagon behind her, hearing every word. And she made a choice. "You're quite right, Mrs. Pruitt," she said, clear and even, and pitched to carry just as far as the other woman's had. "A girl with nothing should be careful what she answers, so I read his letter very carefully, and do you know what it promised me?" She paused. "Let it hang. Hard work, hard winters, and no pretty lies." She looked the woman dead in the eye. "I have known men who offered the opposite. I find I prefer the honest kind. Good morning." And she turned and went into the store with her chin level and her hands shaking inside her gloves, leaving the fox fur woman opening and closing her mouth on the boardwalk. When she came out with her parcels, Holt was looking at her. Not the clothes look, not the weighing look, something else. He said nothing the whole way home, but about halfway where the creek crossed the road, he spoke once low to the horses or to the cold. or to her, she was never sure which. She had that coming, he said, for about 10 years. And Adeline looked at her parcels and hid her smile in the collar of her coat. It was that night, or near it, that she first heard the thing in the dark by the corral. She had not been able to sleep. Again. She had taken to walking late when the house was quiet, just to the kitchen. For water sometimes out onto the back porch to look at the impossible spill of stars over the black ridges. The cold woke her up, and the stars calmed her down, and she had begun to love that hour, the 1 hour of the day that belonged to no one but her. She was on the porch, wrapped in a quilt, when she heard the voices. Low, around the side of the house by the corral. 2 men. She could not make out words at first, only tone, and the tone was wrong. Furtive. The way men speak when they do not want to be heard. She should have gone inside. She did not. She moved along the porch, quiet, in her stocking feet, until the voices resolved into words. One of them she knew. Asa. That bright, easy voice gone low and hard and unfamiliar. The other she did not know. A stranger's voice. Older. Cold. Not how these things work, the stranger was saying. The papers are signed. The note comes due in the spring, and when it does, I will have what I am owed, one way. I told you, Asa. Tight. I told you to give it time. These things take time. You can't just. I have given it time. I have given it 2 years of time. The stranger's voice dropped, and Adeline had to strain. When the spring thaw opens that road, Mr. Brennan, the matter settles itself. With the eldest gone, there is nothing standing in the way. You understand me. Nothing. Silence. Then Asa, very quiet, in a voice she had never heard from him. Don't talk about that, he said. Not yet. Boots. A horse. The creak of leather and the soft thud of hooves moving off into the dark, unhurried, the way Holt had come up the valley road that first evening. Adeline stood frozen on the porch, with the quilt clutched to her throat. The papers are signed. The note comes due in the spring, with the eldest gone. The eldest. Holt. Her mind raced and stumbled and raced again. A debt. The Brennan place had a debt. That was not so strange, was it? A place this size, there would be loans, mortgages, all the ordinary paper of any large concern. And Asa, of course, Asa would be the one to deal with it. Asa, with all the words, Asa, who handled the talking while his silent brothers handled the work. But the way he had said it, don't talk about that, not yet. And the stranger, with the eldest gone, there is nothing standing in the way. Gone. Where? She told herself a dozen reasonable things standing there in the cold. She told herself she had heard half a conversation in the dark and built a horror out of it. She told herself that gone meant nothing more than a man traveling, a man away on business. That spring brought the timber drives and the markets and 100 ordinary reasons for the eldest brother to be gone. She told herself all of it. And not one word of it touched the cold thing that had settled in her stomach, because she had heard Asa's voice change, and because very faintly underneath everything she had heard the stranger laugh. She did not tell Holt. What was there to tell? That she had eavesdropped in the dark and heard his brother discussing a debt, that she had felt afraid for no reason she could put into words. He would look at her with that closed, coffee-dark gaze and think exactly what Mrs. Pruitt thought, that she was a scheming girl trying to make trouble between brothers, trying to worm her way into things that were not hers. She was 3 weeks married. She had no standing, no proof, nothing but a feeling and a laugh in the dark. So she kept it to herself and she watched. She watched Asa, who was exactly as he had always been, bright, easy, quick with a story. If anything, he was kinder to her now than before, and she hated herself for the way that kindness had started to feel like a thing with teeth behind it. She watched the road that ran up out of the valley, the road the stranger had ridden off on, and she watched the snow pile deeper across it week by week until the morning came that Ford stood at the window with his coffee and said to no one in particular that the high pass was closed. Adeline set down her cup. Closed until when? She asked. Thaw. Ford did not turn from the window. March. April, a hard year. Nobody in. Nobody out save a fool with a death wish. He drank his coffee. Snowed in proper now. Just us. Just us. She looked around the warm, familiar room. The fire. The books. Hetty at the stove. And it came to her slow and cold that the thing she had felt as safety, the locked door, the high walls, the valley cupped between two ridges, was also a thing called trapped, that there was no town to run to, no stagecoach to flag, no road out until the spring thaw opened it the same spring. The stranger had named the spring. The note came due. She was sealed into this valley with whatever was coming. And whatever was coming, she was beginning to fear, was already inside the house. It was the second week of the deep snow that Holt started to feel poorly. It began so small. A man like Holt did not complain, so she pieced it together from the edges. He ate less. She noticed it at the table the way she had learned to notice everything, the way a banker's daughter counts without seeming to. He pushed the food around his plate. He left the bread. Then the color. There was a grayness coming into him under the weathered brown, the look of a man who is tired in a way that sleep does not fix. Then one morning, he did not come down at all. Hetty went up with a tray and came down with it untouched, and a line between her brows. Stomach's turned on him, she said. Says it's nothing. Says he ate something that didn't sit. She set the tray down hard. Holt Brennan's got the constitution of an ox. I've known that man 15 years and seen him sick exactly never. Adeline stood very still by the window. Strongest man I ever knew. Never sick a day. Just started fading. Belly pains, couldn't keep food down. Asa's voice. By the firelight. Over a bowl of beans, no. She pushed it down. Hard. Down where the other cold thing lived, the one she had heard in the dark by the corral. She would not think it. It was monstrous. It was the kind of thought that came from a year of being afraid, a year of learning to see knives in every shadow. Men got sick. Strong men got sick. The cold got into a body. Doc Larkin himself had said as much about the father, a stomach complaint, the cold in an old man's gut. But Holt was not an old man. Holt was 32 and strong as the mountain he had built his fortune on, and he was upstairs in a darkening room, and he was not eating, and he was fading, the same way his father had faded, in the same house, in the same deep winter, with the same road sealed behind the same snow, with the same stranger's voice somewhere out beyond it saying with the eldest gone, there is nothing standing in the way. Adeline gripped the windowsill until her knuckles went white. That night, Holt was worse. By the third day, they sent Ford down through the drifts on the strongest horse to fetch Doc Larkin from town, and the doctor came back with him half frozen and went up the stairs with his black bag and was gone a long time. When he came down, his face was grave and certain and entirely wrong, though Adeline did not yet have the words for how she knew it was wrong. A gastric complaint, Doc Larkin said, washing his hands at the basin. Aggravated by the season. I've seen it before in these parts. The cold settles in the gut, and the body can't right itself. He dried his hands. I've left laudanum for the pain and a tonic to settle his stomach. Keep him warm. Broth when he can take it. Beyond that. He spread his hands the same way Asa had spread his hands over the beans. We wait. And we hope. A strong man can fight a thing like this off. His father had been a strong man. His father had fought it off for exactly 6 weeks, and then his father had died. Adeline stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked up into the dark of the landing toward the room where her husband, the man who had given her a locked door and asked nothing in return, was wasting away by inches. And she understood that she was standing at the edge of a choice. She could believe the doctor. She could keep the broth warm and say her prayers and wait and hope the way they had all waited and hope for the father and watch this happen a second time. It would be easy. It would be reasonable. Everyone in the house was already doing it. Or she could trust the cold thing in her stomach, the thing that had heard a brother's voice change in the dark, the thing that had counted the food left on a plate and remembered a story told over beans, the thing that whispered in a voice that sounded a great deal like her own, that strong men do not simply fade, that the same death does not visit the same house twice by chance, that somewhere in this snowbound valley there was a hand behind this, and that she might be the only living soul who suspected it. She thought of St. Louis, of Mr. Tate and his spectacles, of all the times she had known a thing was wrong and told herself to be quiet, be small, be reasonable because she was only a woman. And what did she know? She thought of the man upstairs who had looked at her on the porch and said, "You are not plenty." Hetty touched her arm. "You should rest, child. You've gone white as the snow." "No," Adeline said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "No, I am not going to rest." She looked at the untouched tray, at the brown bottle of tonic Doc Larkin had left on the table and the laudanum beside it, at the stairs leading up into the dark. "I am going to sit with my husband, and I am going to find out exactly what is making him sick." Outside, the wind rose and threw a fistful of snow against the black glass, and somewhere down the long, sealed valley, the night held its secret close. But it would not hold it forever, because Adeline Calloway had spent a year learning in the hardest school there is that the most dangerous man in any room is the one who smiles the most. And she had just decided to stop being quiet. That first night beside his bed taught her what fear could really do to a body. Adeline sat in the hard chair by the window with a single candle burning and watched Holt Brennan sleep. And it was not sleep. Sleep is a rest. This was a struggle. He lay tangled in the damp sheets, his breath coming shallow and uneven, and now and then his great frame would seize with a cramp that bent him double. Even in his stupor, she had brought a basin and a cloth. She wiped his forehead when the sweat came. She held his head when the sickness rose and there was nothing left in him to bring up. She did the small, useless tending things a body does when it cannot do the large, necessary one. And she watched. That was the thing she had decided. She would watch everything, every cup he drank, every spoonful he took. Because somewhere in this house there was an answer, and she did not yet know its shape, only that it was hiding in plain sight, the way the most dangerous things always do. Toward dawn he surfaced. His eyes opened fever bright and found her in the candlelight, and for a moment he did not seem to know where he was. Then he did, and something crossed his face that she had not expected. "Shame. You shouldn't see this," he rasped. "Hush," she said. "A wife's first month." A terrible ghost of his dry humor. "Nursing a dying man. I have done poorly by you, Miss Calloway." "Mrs. Brennan," she corrected him. "And you are not dying." "My father said the same." The words landed in the dark room like a stone dropped down a well. Adeline went very still. "What do you mean?" she said carefully. "Your father said what same?" Holt's eyes had drifted half closed. The fever was pulling him back under. "Said he wasn't dying," he murmured. "Right up until he was. Same bed, same season." His hand moved on the quilt, weak searching, and without thinking she took it, and his fingers closed around hers with a strength that frightened her because it was so much less than it should have been. Funny thing, the body, strongest man I knew, just stopped. "Holt," she leaned close. "Holt, listen to me. Did anything happen before he got sick? Did anything change in the house? Did anyone?" But he was gone. Back down into the fevered dark, his breathing leveling into that shallow struggle, his hand going slack in hers. She sat holding his slack hand as the window grayed toward morning. Same bed, same season, strongest man I knew. Just stopped. She was no longer telling herself she was imagining it. She had crossed that line somewhere in the night, somewhere between the basin and the cloth, and there was no crossing back. Two strong men. The same house. The same deep winter. the same wasting sickness that the same doctor called the same harmless name. That was not chance. She did not know how she knew. She only knew that she had spent her whole life around men who lied for a living, men in good coats with soft hands, who could look you in the eye and call a theft a loan. And somewhere in those years she had grown an instinct, a cold, quiet animal that lived under her ribs and woke when it smelled a lie. It was awake now, and it was looking at the brown bottle of tonic on the bedside table, Doc Larkin's medicine to settle the stomach. The medicine Holt drank a spoonful of 3 times a day since the sickness took him. She picked the bottle up, turned it in the gray light. It was just a bottle, just a brown glass bottle with a cork and a clouded liquid inside, and she had no way on earth to know what was in it, no way to test it, no learning in her head that could read its secrets. She was a banker's daughter. She knew ledgers, not medicines. But a small thing surfaced from the bottom of her memory. From before St. Louis went bad, from the good years, the early years when her father had still been a man worth admiring and had taken her, a girl of 9, to call on a customer at his place of business, a druggist, a man who mixed medicines behind a marble counter in a shop that smelled of mint and bitter green, and who had let a curious child watch while he ground his powders and weighed them on a tiny brass scale. She had spent whole afternoons there over the years that followed. She had loved it. The order of it, the bottles in their rows, each labeled in a careful hand, each with its dose and its danger. She knew from those afternoons a thing most women in that valley did not. She knew that some medicines in the wrong measure were not medicines at all. She set the bottle down. She did not know enough, not nearly. But she knew where knowing might be found, and it was not in Doc Larkin's black bag, and it was not in this snowbound house full of brothers. It was 3 miles up the valley in a sod-roofed cabin on the edge of the timber, where an old woman lived alone with her cats and her dried herbs, and a reputation that the town had taught Adeline to distrust. The herb woman, the one Mrs. Pruitt's kind called a witch, and worse, Granny Mayelle. She went the next day on foot in the bitter cold while Holt slept and the brothers worked, and Hetty thought she had only gone out for air. It was a hard 3 miles. The snow was deep and the going slow, and twice she sank to her thigh and had to claw her way out, and by the time the little sod cabin came into view, smoke curling thin from its crooked pipe, her skirts were frozen stiff to the knee, and her lungs burned with every breath. She knocked. The door opened on a wall of warmth and the smell of 100 dried green things, and a small, ancient woman stood there bent as a question mark, with eyes the color of river ice and a face folded into 10,000 wrinkles, and she looked at Adeline standing frozen on her threshold and did not seem surprised at all. "The Brennan bride," Granny Mayelle said. Her voice was a dry whisper like wind through cured grass. "I wondered when you'd come. You know who I am. Everybody in this valley is somebody's business child. Even a hermit hears." The old woman stepped back. "Come in before you lose a toe. You'll want tea, and you'll want to ask me something you're afraid to say out loud." Adeline came in, and it was the strangest thing. She had braced for fear for the eeriness the town's gossip had painted, and instead she felt only a great loosening, a sense of having reached at last someone who would not lie to her. The cabin was poor and crowded and warm. Bundles of herbs hung from every beam. A black cat watched her from a shelf with golden eyes. The old woman moved among it all with the sureness of a woman who had lived in one place for 60 years and knew the place of every single thing in it. She put a cup of something hot and bitter green into Adeline's hands. "Now," Granny Mayelle said, settling into a rocker by the fire, "the eldest Brennan boy is sick." It was not a question. "He is," Adeline said. "Belly pains, wasting. Can't keep his food, getting weaker by the day." The old woman rocked. "And the good doctor calls it a gastric complaint and leaves a tonic and says wait and hope. Same as he said for the old man 2 winters gone." The cup trembled in Adeline's hands. How do you know that? Because I have lived a long time, said Granny Mael, and I have seen a great many people sick, and I have buried more than I care to count. And I know the difference between a sickness God sends and a sickness a man makes. Her ice-colored eyes settled on Adeline, and they were not eerie at all. They were terribly, terribly kind. You know it too, don't you? That's why you walked 3 miles in the snow to a witch's door. Because everybody told you what you saw wasn't there. And you stopped believing them. Adeline's throat closed. I think, she whispered, I think something is wrong. I think someone... Don't. The old woman raised a knotted hand. Don't say the rest yet. Saying it makes it real, and once it's real, you can't go back to the warm, comfortable dark where you don't know. Be sure you want the light, child. The light is a hard place to live. Adeline thought of Holt's hand going slack in hers. I want the light, she said. Granny Mael nodded slowly, as if she had expected nothing less. Then bring me his tonic, she said, and anything else he eats or drinks that the others don't. And bring me something else. The old woman leaned forward, and her dry whisper dropped lower still. Bring me a piece of his silver, a spoon he eats with, a cup he drinks from. Real silver, mind, not plate. The old wedding silver if the family's got it. Bring me that. Silver. Adeline frowned. Why silver? And the old woman smiled a slow, terrible, knowing smile that showed the gaps in her teeth, and said a thing that Adeline would carry with her to the end of her days. Because silver doesn't lie, child, said Granny Mael. Silver tells the truth that men hide. You bring me his spoon, and his spoon will tell us whether your husband is dying by the hand of God. She would not say more. That was the maddening, frightening thing. Adeline pressed her there in the warm, crowded cabin, asked her plainly what she suspected what the silver would show, what was making Holt sick. And the old woman only shook her head and rocked and said that she would not put a name to a thing she had not yet seen, because to accuse was a heavy and a dangerous business, and she would not do it on a feeling, not even a true one. She would do it on proof. Bring me the spoon, was all she would say, and the tonic. And then we will know what we are facing. Not before. So Adeline went back down the 3 miles of snow with nothing in her hands and a great deal more in her head, and she began that evening to steal from her own house. It was not hard. That was the part that shamed her. Hetty kept the good silver in a felt-lined case in the dining room sideboard, the wedding silver of the brother's long-dead mother, brought out only for the rare grand occasion. Adeline had seen it at her own wedding supper. She slipped a single spoon from the case while Hetty was at the stove and felt like a thief in her own home, and told herself that a thief who steals to save a life is something other than a thief, though she was not entirely sure she believed it. The tonic was harder, because Holt drank from the tonic, and if she took the whole bottle, its absence would be noticed, and so she did a careful, clever thing. She poured a little of it, just a swallow, into a small, empty vial she had begged from Hetty, on the pretext of wanting it for sewing oil. Then she topped the bottle back up with a little water, so the level looked unchanged. And then she stood in the dim dining room with a stolen spoon in one pocket and a stolen swallow of medicine in the other, and she made herself a promise that whatever the silver said, she would not flinch from it. She got back to the cabin 2 days later. She had to wait for her chance for a morning when Holt slept and the work pulled the brothers far out across the property, and Hetty was busy enough not to wonder. She made the cold 3 miles again faster this time, knowing the way, and Granny Mael opened the door before she had finished knocking. You have them, the old woman said, reading her face. I have them. Then come and we'll learn the truth of it. Inside, the old woman cleared a space on her plank table and worked by the light of the fire and a tallow candle. She took the spoon first, held it up. It was tarnished a little the way old silver tarnishes, a soft, warm gray, and Granny Mael clucked her tongue and produced a soft cloth and polished it patiently until it shone bright as a coin. until Adeline could see her own anxious face curved and tiny in the bowl of it. "There," the old woman said, bright as the day it was forged. "Remember how it looks now, child. Remember it well." Then she took the vial of tonic. She uncorked it, sniffed it, frowned, touched a single drop to the tip of her tongue, and held it there a moment, and spat carefully into the fire, and the frown deepened into something Adeline did not like at all. "Bitter," Granny Mayell murmured. "But a tonic's meant to be bitter. That tells us nothing by itself. A clever hand hides bitter in bitter." She set the vial down. "But Silver isn't fooled by clever." She poured the swallow of tonic into a small clay dish, and she laid the polished silver spoon in it, bowl down, half submerged in the clouded liquid. "Now," she said, "now we wait, and we drink our tea, and we talk of other things so the waiting doesn't eat you. Tell me, child, where do you come from? Tell me a long story, the longer the better." So Adeline talked. She told the old woman about St. Louis, about her father and his charm and his debts, in the way charm and debt are so often the same coat turned inside out, about her mother, dead young, and the handwriting in the Bible margins, about Mr. Tate and his spectacles and the things he had said, and the morning she had left, and the letter that had brought her here plain and promising nothing. And the whole time she talked, her eyes kept sliding to the clay dish, to the silver spoon lying in the tonic. Granny Mayell let her talk for the better part of an hour. The fire burned down and was fed and burned again. The cat moved from the shelf to the old woman's lap. And just when Adeline had begun to think that nothing would happen, that she had imagined it all after all, that she would walk home with her foolish fears and a clean spoon, the old woman reached out one knotted finger and tipped the dish toward the firelight. "There," Granny Mayell whispered. "Look, there it is." Adeline looked, and her blood went to ice, because the spoon was no longer bright. Where it had lain in the tonic, where the clouded liquid had touched the polished silver, the metal had darkened, not the soft, warm gray of honest age. A different darkness, a stain dull and ugly creeping black across the bowl of the spoon, like a bruise blooming under skin, like rot, like something obscene. "No," Adeline breathed. "Silver doesn't lie." The old woman's voice was very soft and very old and very sad. "Pure silver, set against a certain poison turns. It tarnishes black. It always has. Wise women have known it longer than there have been doctors to forget it." She lifted the stained spoon from the dish and held it up, and the black stain caught the firelight undeniable. "There is something in that tonic, child, that has no business in any medicine. Something that blackens silver, and I have known only one thing in all my years that does this slow and quiet in a dose that a man can drink 3 times a day and call it cure." Adeline could not speak. She stared at the blackened spoon. "Whatever you suspected walking up here," Granny Mayell said gently, "you were right. Your husband isn't dying of the cold in his gut. Your husband is being poisoned. A little at a time, slow enough to look like wasting, slow enough to fool a country doctor who's already got the answer in his head from the last time. Slow enough," she paused, "slow enough that he might already be too far gone to save." And there it was. The thing she had carried up 3 miles of snow, the thing she had been afraid to say out loud in case saying it made it real. It was real now. There was a poisoner in the Brennan house. The cabin spun a little. Adeline gripped the edge of the plank table and made herself breathe. In, out. The way she had taught herself to breathe in St. Louis in the dark when the fear came for her. She would not faint. She would not weep. She had passed the place where those things helped. She made herself think. "Who?" she said. Her voice came out strange and flat. "Who would?" "The doctor. Doc Larkin made the tonic." "Doc Larkin." "Maybe." Granny Mayell did not sound convinced. "A doctor's got the means, surely. The knowledge, the access. But ask yourself the why, child. Why would a town doctor ride 3 miles in the snow to poison a man who's never done him harm? What does Doc Larkin gain by a dead Brennan? She shook her head. No, the doctor might be a fool. I've never known him to be a devil. The poison's in the tonic, yes. But the tonic sits open on a bedside table in a house full of people for 3 doses a day for weeks. Anyone in that house could have touched it. Anyone could have added to it between the doctor's visits. Anyone in that house. Adeline thought of the house, of who was in it. Hetty, who had served the family 15 years and wept at the wedding. Ford, silent, watchful Ford, who taught her the animals with his patient hands and almost never spoke. Asa, bright, easy Asa, who told her stories by the fire. Asa, who handled all the talking. Asa, whose voice had changed in the dark by the corral. Asa, who had stood with a cold stranger and listened to the words, with the eldest gone, there is nothing standing in the way, and had said, don't talk about that, not yet. The cup shook in her hands. I think, she began and stopped because the accusation was so monstrous that her tongue would not carry it. You think you know, Granny Mayell said. I see it in your face. You've already got a name in your heart. The old woman fixed her with those ice-colored eyes. But hear me, child, and hear me well, for this is the most important thing I will tell you. A name in your heart is not proof. You go back to that house and you point a finger on a feeling, and one of 2 things happens. Either you're wrong and you've torn a grieving family to pieces over nothing, or you're right. She leaned close. And if you're right, then you have just told a poisoner that you know. And a man who will poison his own blood to get what he wants will not blink at poisoning a wife who's only been in the family a month. You understand me. The moment your suspicion shows on your face, your life is worth exactly as much as your husband's, which is to say, not much. The fire popped. The cat purred. And Adeline Calloway understood that she had just stepped through a door that did not open backward. She walked home in the failing light, with the blackened spoon wrapped in a cloth in her pocket, and a plan forming cold and clear in the part of her mind that had survived St. Louis. She could not accuse. Not yet. Granny Mayell was right. She had a stained spoon and a feeling and half a conversation overheard in the dark, and against that stood a respected doctor's diagnosis and a family's grief and the simple, unbelievable monstrousness of the truth. No one would believe her. Worse, if she spoke and was believed by the wrong ears, she would be next. So she would do 2 things. She would save Holt, quietly, however she could, and she would catch the poisoner. With proof so plain that no one, not Doc Larkin, not the town, not God himself, could call it a jealous bride's invention. She did not yet know how she would do either, but she knew where to begin. She would begin by making sure that not one more drop of poison passed her husband's lips. That night, she sat by Holt's bed again, and when the time came for his tonic, she went through the motions for anyone who might be watching the spoon, the bottle, the careful dose. And then, when Hetty had gone down and the door was shut, and there was no one to see, she tipped the spoonful into the basin instead of into his mouth, and gave him a sip of plain, clean water she had drawn herself from the spring that morning. Water she had carried up and kept in a jar in her room, water no other hand had touched. It was not much. It was everything. Because if the poison was in the tonic, then a man who did not drink the tonic could not be poisoned by it. It was the simplest arithmetic in the world. Take away the cause, and the body, if it was not too late, would begin to mend itself. She did not know if it was too late. She would find out. For 3 days she did this, 3 times a day. The pantomime of the dose, then the basin, then the clean water from her own jar. She fed him broth she made herself from a separate pot, with water she had carried, and she watched over every mouthful like a hawk over a nest. And she trusted no one, not Hetty, though her heart told her Hetty was true, not Ford, not Asa. God help her, especially not Asa. She smiled at them all, and she lied to them all with her face, and she carried the secret alone, because Granny Mael's warning rang in her ears the moment your suspicion shows your life is worth as much as his. And on the fourth day, Holt opened his eyes in the morning light, and they were clear. Not fever bright, clear. The coffee dark of them sharp and present in a way she had not seen since the sickness took him. He looked at her sitting in her chair by the window, and his brow furrowed, and he said in a voice that was weak, but was his own, his real own, "You look like you haven't slept in a week." She had not. She burst into tears. She could not help it. 4 days of terror and lying and carrying water up 3 miles of cold and watching a strong man die by inches and not being able to tell a living soul. It all broke at once at the simple sight of his clear eyes, and she put her face in her hands and wept like a child while her bewildered husband watched. "I have said something wrong," Holt said, alarmed, trying to push himself up. "Adeline, what? What is it?" "Nothing." She wiped her face fiercely. "Nothing is wrong. You are better. You are better, that is all. Lie back. Lie back, you great fool. You'll undo it." He lay back, but his eyes did not leave her, and she saw the question forming in them. The why. Why was she weeping? Why had she not slept? Why, when a sick man starts to mend, would his wife look not relieved, but haunted, looking over her shoulder at the door of her own house? He was a quiet man. He was not a stupid one. "Adeline," he said slowly, "what aren't you telling me?" And she stood at the edge of another choice, because she could keep lying. She could tell him he had simply turned the corner, that the sickness had run its course, and let him mend in ignorance, while she hunted the poisoner alone. It would be safer for him. A sick man cannot guard himself, cannot keep a secret, might let the truth show on his face to the very person who must never see it. Or she could tell him, the one person in this house her instinct swore she could trust, the one whose death the poisoner wanted, who therefore could not possibly be the poisoner. She could stop being alone. Granny Mael's voice. Don't point a finger on a feeling. But this was not pointing a finger. This was telling the intended victim that there was a knife meant for his back. She crossed to the door, opened it a crack, checked the empty hall, shut it again, and came and sat on the edge of the bed, close, and took his hand in both of hers and lowered her voice until it was barely a breath. "Holt," she said, "I am going to tell you something, and you are going to hear all of it before you speak. And you are not, whatever you feel, going to let one flicker of it show on your face when you go back among your family. Can you do that? Can you promise me that? Your life depends on it. I am not being dramatic. Your life depends on it." His clear eyes searched hers, and whatever he saw there, it was enough. Because this man who weighed everything, who set down every word like a stone, did not argue, did not scoff, did not call her a foolish, frightened bride. He simply nodded. "Once. Tell me," he said. So she did. She told him about the conversation by the corral, in the dark, the stranger's cold voice, and the words with the eldest gone. She told him about the way his father had died, the same way, in the same season, and the way she had counted the food on his plate. She told him about the 3 miles of snow, and the witch, who was not a witch, and the polished silver spoon laid in his medicine. And she took the cloth from her pocket and unwrapped it there in the morning light, and laid the blackened spoon in his palm. She watched him understand. She watched it move across his face, slow, terrible, the way a shadow moves across a valley when a cloud crosses the sun. The disbelief first, then the refusal. Then, because he was an honest man and could not refuse a thing, his own eyes told him the cold dawning horror of belief. His fingers closed around the spoon. "Who?" he said, and his voice had gone to something low and dangerous that she had never heard from him, a thing with the whole weight of the mountain behind it. "Who would? In my own house. Who?" "I don't know," Adeline said, and it was half true. "I have a fear, but Granny Mael is right. Holt, I have no proof, only a fear, and if we move on, a fear, and we are wrong, we destroy your family, and if we are right, and we show our hand too soon," she gripped his hand harder, We have to be sure. We have to catch whoever it is. With proof no one can deny. And until then, you and I have to pretend. You have to keep being sick." He stared at her. "Pretend to be dying," he said slowly. "Yes, so that whoever is killing me thinks he's winning, thinks he has all the time in the world, gets careless." Understanding moved in his eyes, and with it, something that might almost have been the ghost of respect. "And shows himself." "Yes," Adeline whispered. "You keep wasting away where they can see. You eat nothing at the table. You let them watch you fail. And in this room, with me behind a locked door, you eat the food I make and drink the water I carry, and you get strong. You get strong in secret, Holt. Strong enough that when the moment comes, and it will come, you are ready for it. And whoever did this—" Her voice did not shake. She was almost surprised that it did not shake. "Whoever did this looks up one day and finds a dead man standing in front of him, alive, and knowing everything." For a long moment, Holt Brennan said nothing. He looked at the blackened spoon in his hand. He looked at the locked door. He looked at this woman he had married out of duty. This woman he had given a locked room, and asked nothing of this woman who had walked 3 miles through the snow to a witch's cabin to learn why he was dying, who had carried spring water up a mountain in a jar for 4 days, who had wept not because he was ill, but because he was getting well, who was sitting on the edge of his bed asking him to play dead so that she could catch a murderer. And something happened in his weathered, closed-off face that had not happened in 2 long years. The wall behind his eyes, the one built around the old wound, the one that had been there so long he had forgotten there was anything behind it. It cracked. Just a little. Just enough for her to see for one unguarded moment the man underneath. Tired, lonely, astonished. Looking at her as if he had agreed to share his house with a stranger and discovered a month later that he had been given something he did not know how to deserve. "Adeline Calloway," he said, low, rough. "I think I have made a very serious mistake about you." "What mistake?" she said. "I thought he said that I was the one doing you a kindness." And outside the window, the snow fell soft and endless over the sealed valley. And down the hall, a floorboard creaked under a careful foot, and neither of them yet knew how close the danger already stood, nor how much closer it was about to come. But they were not alone in it anymore, and that Adeline thought holding her husband's hand in the cold, bright morning, that changed everything. The pretending began the very next morning, and it was the hardest thing Adeline had ever done, because now she had a secret with edges. Now every meal was a performance. She would carry Holt's tray up the stairs in front of Hetty full and steaming, and she would carry it back down barely touched, and she would let her face show the right thing. Worry, grief, the slow dread of a wife watching her husband slip away. Inside behind the locked door, it was the opposite. Inside, Holt ate. She brought him the broth she made in her own small pot with the spring water from her jar, and she watched him take it down, spoonful by spoonful, and day by day, she watched the gray leave him. The color came back under the weathered brown. The hollows in his cheeks began slowly to fill. His hands, when they took the cup, took it with a little more of their old strength each morning. It was a miracle worked in secret, and it was a terrible danger. Because a man getting well is hard to hide. The very thing she wanted, his strength returning, was the thing that could betray them both if the wrong eyes saw it. So they made rules. In daylight, with the door open, Holt lay still and spoke little and let his eyes go dull. He had to look like a man with one foot in the grave. He had to push the food around the plate when Hetty sat with him. He had to let Asa come and sit by the bed and hold his brother's hand and speak soft words of comfort, and he had to lie there and take that comfort with a dying man's gratitude. That was the part that nearly broke Holt. Adeline saw it. The first time Asa came up to sit with him, she was there in her chair by the window, mending, watching everything from under her lashes. And Asa sat down on the edge of the bed, all warmth and worry. and took his eldest brother's hand and said, "You hang on, Holt. You hear me. You're too stubborn to go like Pa did. You hang on." And she watched Holt's jaw tighten, just a fraction, the smallest flicker of a muscle, because he did not know. That was the thing she had not been able to give him. She had told him there was a poisoner, and she had told him she had a fear, but she had not given him a name because she did not have proof, and because she was afraid of what a man like Holt would do with a name before there was proof. So Holt lay in that bed not knowing if the hand holding his was the hand that was killing him. He looked up at Asa's worried face, at Ford in the doorway, at Hetty wringing her apron, and he did not know which of them, if any, wanted him dead. That was its own poison, slower than the arsenic, just as cruel. It could be none of them, he said to her that night, low in the dark when the house was asleep. It could be the doctor. It could be a hand from the timber camp with a grudge. It could be. It could, she said. But you don't think so? She was quiet a moment. I think, she said carefully, that we say nothing until we are sure. Because the moment you look at the wrong man the wrong way, we have lost. Can you live like that, Holt, eating at your brother's table and not knowing? He looked at the ceiling for a long time. I have eaten at that table 2 years, he said finally, thinking my father died of the cold. I can manage a few more weeks of not knowing, as long as... He stopped. As long as what? As long as you keep carrying that water, he said. I find I have got fond of being alive again. It was not a sweet thing to say. There was no poetry in it, and yet she lay awake a long while after turning it over, because it was the kind of plain, true thing that meant more than poetry ever had, and she did not know what to do with the warmth it left behind. She told herself it was relief, nothing more. She was a poor liar, it turned out, when the lie was to herself. The midwinter brought the thaw that should not have come. It happened sometimes, Hetty said. A false spring. A week of warm wind in the dead heart of February that softened the snow and ran the gutters and fooled the foolish into thinking winter was breaking before it slammed shut again twice as hard. The old-timers called it a weather breeder, a warm spell that bred a worse cold behind it. But for a few days the high pass opened. Just a crack, just enough that a determined man on a good horse might get down to the wider world and back before it sealed again. And that was when Ford came to her. It was the strangest thing. She had spent these weeks trusting no one watching all of them, and Ford most of all, because Ford was the silent one, the watchful one, the one whose stillness she could not read. And now here was Ford finding her alone at the spring, one cold, bright morning, while she filled her jar, standing back a respectful distance with his hat in his hands, looking at her with those steady eyes. Mrs. Brennan, he said. Ford. He's getting better, Ford said. Adeline's heart stopped. She kept her face still. Years of practice. The doctor said a strong man might fight it off. The doctor! Ford almost smiled. It was a grim thing, that almost smile. The doctor's a fool, ma'am, and we both know it. My brother's been dying for weeks. Then a month back, right about when you started sitting up nights with him, he stops dying. He turned his hat in his big scarred hands. I'm not a clever man. I don't have Asa's tongue, but I watch. It's about all I do. And I've been watching you carry a jar of water up that hill every morning for 3 weeks. And I've been watching you take a full tray up and a full tray down. And I've been doing my arithmetic. Adeline could not speak. Run, said the cold animal under her ribs. Lie. Deny it. He might be the one. But she looked at Ford's steady eyes, and the animal went quiet, and a different thing rose up in her, the same thing that had risen in Granny Mayelle's cabin, the great loosening, the sense of standing in front of someone who would not lie. What do you watch, Ford? She said softly. When you watch the house, at night. And Ford's jaw worked, and he looked away across the snow, and when he spoke, his voice was rough. Pa didn't die of the cold, he said. I knew it then. I was 27, scared with no proof, and a town doctor saying otherwise, and I told myself I was wrong. I let it go." His hands tightened on the hat. "I have hated myself for 2 years, ma'am, for letting it go." And then Holt starts down the same road, same bed, same winter, same doctor, saying the same fool words. And I swore to God I would not let it go a second time. He looked back at her. "I've been watching, trying to catch it, trying to see who. And I've got nothing but a feeling and a brother I've already half buried twice." Adeline's eyes filled, because here was the thing she had not let herself hope for. Another set of eyes that had seen what no one else would see. Another heart that had carried the unbearable suspicion alone in silence, afraid of being wrong, afraid of tearing the family apart. She was not the only one. "Ford," she whispered, "I have something to show you, but you have to swear to me. You have to swear on your father's grave that you will not act on it. Not yet, not until we are sure. Because I made the same promise, and it is the only thing keeping your brother alive." Ford looked at her a long moment. "My father's grave," he said. "All right, I swear it." So she took the blackened spoon from her pocket where she had taken to carrying it always, and she unwrapped the cloth, and she laid it in his palm in the cold, bright morning light by the spring. And she watched Ford Brennan understand. It went across his face the way it had gone across Holt's. The disbelief, the refusal, and then because he was an honest man, the cold acceptance. He looked at the stain on the silver. He looked at the jar of spring water in her hands. He looked at the house up the hill, the smoke curling from its chimneys, the place his father had built, the place where his father had been murdered, and where his brother was being murdered now. When he looked back at her, his eyes were wet, and there was a terrible new hardness in them. "Silver," he said. "It's silver does that. It's silver does that." My God! He closed his hand around it. All this time, it was right there in front of us. On the table. 3 times a day. He shook his head slowly. "We've been feeding it to him with our own hands." "Not anymore," Adeline said. "Now we catch whoever's putting it there. And we do it with proof, Ford proof, no man can deny, because if we move too soon, we lose him," Ford said. "I know. I lost Pa to moving too late. I'll not lose Holt to moving too soon." He wrapped the spoon back in its cloth, careful, almost tender, and handed it back to her. "Tell me what you need from me." And just like that, she was not alone, and she was not 2. She was 3. They made a plan, the 3 of them, in stolen moments. Holt in his bed playing the dying man by day, the conspirator by night. Ford slipping up the back stairs when the house slept. Adeline in the middle carrying messages and water and the terrible weight of the secret. The plan was patient. The plan was cruel in its patience. They would let the poisoner keep poisoning. They would let Holt seem to fade. And they would watch. All 3 of them watching day and night for the hand that touched the tonic. Because the poison did not put itself in the bottle. Someone added to it. Between the doctor's rare visits, someone in that house was lifting the cork and tipping in the death and setting it back exactly so. They only had to see it once with 2 witnesses, and they would have him. But the poisoner was careful. Days passed. The false thaw held, then began to fail. The warm wind dying, the cold creeping back at the edges of the day. The high pass was closing again, and still no one was caught because whoever it was did it in some unwatched moment, some gap they could not close, and the not knowing began to wear on all 3 of them like a stone wearing a rope. It was in that long, strange waiting that Holt told her about Sarah. It came at night, the way the true things always came with him, in the dark of the locked room, with the candle out, and only the faint gray of the snow at the window. She had thought he was asleep. She was in the chair, half dozing, when his voice came across the dark, low, and careful, a man laying a thing down he had carried a long way. "There was a woman," he said. "Before, you should know it. You're my wife, you should know what you married." Adeline said nothing. She had learned that with Holt, the surest way to stop the words was to reach for them. "Sarah," he said, "years back now, we were to be married. Spring wedding, all of it planned." A pause. "She was from down the valley. A pretty thing. Quick. Liked to laugh. I was younger then. I thought I knew what I had." "What happened?" Adeline said, soft. Into the dark. A man came through, a land agent, well-dressed, money in his pockets, and a railroad behind him, and a smooth way of talking. His voice did not change, but she heard the old hurt under it worn smooth as a river stone. She went with him 2 weeks before the wedding, left a note, said she wanted more than a cold valley, and a man who couldn't say what he felt. A long silence. "She wasn't wrong about the second part. I couldn't. I still can't, hardly. You may have noticed." The dry ghost of his humor even here. It undid her a little. "I built the wall after that," Holt said. "Not on purpose. A man doesn't decide to do it. He just wakes up one morning and finds he's stopped reaching for things because reaching is how you get your hand cut. And then Pa died, and there was the place to carry, and the wall was useful, and the years went by, and I forgot there was anything behind it at all." He shifted in the dark. "Then I wrote that sorry letter, because Hetty said a man my age and a place this size needed a wife, and I thought, all right, a working partner, fair and plain, nothing that could cut. I'd ask for nothing and give nothing, and we'd both be safe. And instead," Adeline said, "and instead a woman got off a wagon who wasn't afraid of me," Holt said. "Who answered me back on the porch the first night, who walked 3 miles through the snow to a witch's door for a husband she barely knew, and carried water up a hill for a month to keep him breathing." She heard him let out a slow breath. "I didn't know what to do with that, Adeline. I still don't. The wall's no use against it. It just walks straight through." Adeline sat very still in the dark. She thought of her father and his pretty words, and the way she had decided in St. Louis that love was a thing other women got to have. She thought of how she had braced that first night for a man who would take what he wanted, and how he had given her a locked door instead. "My father was like your land agent," she said at last. "All the charm in the world and nothing under it. I grew up watching him say beautiful things and mean none of them, so I'll tell you what I learned, Holt Brennan, since you told me yours." She found his hand in the dark. "A man who can't find the words but shows up every single day is worth 10 men with a smooth tongue and a fast horse. Sarah traded gold for a cold valley. She was a fool. I'd not make her trade for anything." For a long while he did not answer. Then his fingers closed around hers, careful, the way he held everything that mattered to him, as if it might break, and as if he had only just learned he was allowed to hold it at all. "Get some sleep," he said, finally rough. "You've a long watch tomorrow." But he did not let go of her hand, and she did not pull it back. And they stayed like that, the two of them, in the dark of the snowbound room. Two people who had each been taught that wanting was dangerous, learning slowly in silence that it did not have to be. It was in that strained, watchful week that Crane sent his answer to the waiting. Adeline was at the window when she saw the riders come up the valley. 3 of them, dark against the gray snow, unhurried the middle one she knew at once, even from a distance, by the cold, patient way he sat his horse. The stranger from the corral, Crane. They did not come to the house. They stopped at the near timber yard where the cut logs stood stacked taller than a man. The season's work, the thing that would be floated down river in spring and turned into the money that fed 30 men and held the whole place together. And they set it alight. Adeline saw the first orange tongue climb the stacked timber, and she was out the door before she had thought to move, screaming for Ford, screaming for the hands, and the yard erupted into chaos. Men running with buckets and wet blankets, the horses in the near corral shrieking and bolting at the smell of smoke, Crane and his 2 riders already wheeling away into the dusk, their work done, a message written in fire: pay or burn. Spring is coming. The note comes due. It was Adeline who reached the bolted horses. She did not think about it. Ford was at the timber with the men and the fire and the corral. Gate had been thrown wide by the panic, and 4 good horses were about to break for the open dark and the deep snow and a death by freezing. And her hands remembered all on their own. The patient lessons Ford had given her sideways at the barn, the right way to stand, the right way to move slow and low and sure, so a frightened animal does not bolt. She got the gate. She got between the horses and the open dark. She brought them down out of their terror with her hands and her voice, while the fire roared behind her, and she held them until 2 of the hands came and took the lead ropes from her, staring at the banker's daughter from St. Louis, who had just done a thing none of them would have asked of her. The fire had its own voice, a roar, and under the roar a sound like a great animal feeding a wet, tearing crackle as the flames ate down into the green heart of the stacked logs. The heat pushed at her face from 20 feet off. Sparks went up in their thousands, red against the black sky, and where they came down, they hissed in the snow or caught in a man's hair or his coat and had to be slapped out. Adeline worked the bucket line. She did not remember joining it. One moment she was at the corral with the lead ropes. The next she was in the chain of bodies running from the spring to the fire, taking a full pail from the hands on her right, swinging it on to the hands on her left again, her shoulders screaming, the burned forearm, a line of white fire under her sleeve. The men did not look at her twice now. There was no time for who she was. There was only the next bucket and the next, and the wall of flame that did not seem to care how many buckets there were. It was Ford who saw it would not be enough. "The far stack!" he bellowed, soot black, his voice cracked from the smoke. "Pull the far stack apart. Don't let it jump. If it takes the whole yard, it takes the mill. And if it takes the mill, we're finished." So they stopped fighting the fire they could not win and started saving what they could. The men went at the unburned logs with peavies and chains, and the 2 big draft horses dragging the season's timber back from the reaching flames, one trunk at a time, and Adeline drove the team because she was the one Ford had taught. And the regular teamster was down with a turned ankle, and she stood in the heat and the falling sparks and held 2 terrified draft horses to their work with her hands and her voice, while men hauled logs clear behind her. They held the line at the mill. The far stack came apart in time. The flames had nothing left to jump to but scorched ground and trampled snow, and slowly, the roaring animal starved and sank and died down into a bed of red coals that ticked and shifted and steamed in the dark. It was over an hour before midnight when the last of it was beaten out. They saved most of the timber, not all. The fire ate a corner of the season's work and scorched a wide black scar into the snow, and when it was out, the men stood panting in the red dark, and Ford came to her soot black to the elbows and looked at the horses safe in the corral, and then at her. "That was Crane," she said, quiet so only he could hear. "The one from the dark. The note's real, Ford. Whatever debt your father died over, it's real, and it's coming due in spring, and that man means to have this whole valley." Ford's jaw was a hard line in the firelight. "And Asa brought him here," he said. "Asa's the one deals with the paper. Asa's the one talks to men like that." "We don't know that yet," Adeline said. "Not for certain. We catch him certain, Ford, or we catch nothing." But that night, tending a long burn down the inside of her own forearm where a flying ember had caught her, she lay awake and felt the certainty growing in her, anyway dark and patient, as the man who had ridden up the valley to set a fire. And then Adeline did a thing that changed everything. She got greedy, or brave. She was never sure afterward which it had been, or whether the 2 were the same thing, wearing different coats. She decided to set a trap. It came to her in the night. The poisoner was careful because the poisoner had time. Holt was fading on schedule. There was no urgency, no need to take a risk, so the poisoner could wait for the safe, unwatched moments. But what if there were urgency? What if the poisoner suddenly believed that time had run out? What would force a careful man to be careless? A clock. a deadline, a reason to rush. So, at supper, 2 nights later, with all of them at the table, Hetty and Ford and Asa and Adeline, with Holt's empty chair at the head like an open grave, Adeline laid down her fork and made an announcement. "I have decided," she said, "to send for a doctor from the East." The table went still. "Doc Larkin has done his best," she went on, keeping her voice steady, keeping her eyes on her plate. "But Holt is no better, and I will not sit here and watch him die when there are real physicians in the world. I have heard of a man in Chicago, a Dr. Ambrose Thorne. They say he is the finest diagnostician west of New York." She looked up then, swept the table. "I have the means. I sold what I had to come here, and I have a little left, and I will spend every penny of it. I am sending Ford down the pass tomorrow before it closes with a letter and the fare. Dr. Thorne will come. It will cost a great deal and take a great while, but he will come. And when he comes," she let it hang, "when he comes, he will know exactly what is wrong with my husband, down to the last detail, whatever it is, however hidden." She watched their faces as she said it. Hetty, relief and worry over the cost. Ford, a flicker quickly hidden because Ford was in on it. Ford knew the letter was real, but the purpose was bait. And Asa. She made herself look at Asa last, and she made herself look at him the way a frightened, grieving wife would look at the kind brother who had been her comfort, openly, trustingly, and for the briefest moment. So brief, she might have imagined it. So brief, she spent the rest of the night telling herself she had imagined it. Something moved behind Asa's warm brown eyes. Not grief, not relief, not the worry over money that had crossed Hetty's face. Calculation. It was there and gone in less than a heartbeat, smoothed over instantly with a warm, sad smile, and Asa reached across the table and laid his hand over hers and said, "That's a fine idea, Addie. A fine idea. Spend whatever it takes. We all want our Holt back." His thumb stroked the back of her hand, gentle brotherly. "You're good for this family. You know that. You're good for him." And Adeline smiled back and thanked him, and felt the touch of his hand on hers like the touch of a spider. Because she had seen it. She was almost sure she had seen it. A doctor was coming who would know. A real doctor with real learning who would not call arsenic a gastric complaint. A clock had just started ticking loud in the ears of whoever had been comfortable in their slow, careful murder. And a careful man told that an expert was on his way to examine his victim in detail, a man who needed that victim dead and silent before the expert arrived. That man would have to move. That man would have to finish it, soon. Before the pass opened in spring and the great Dr. Thorne came up the valley to find a poisoned man instead of a buried one, she had lit a fuse. She lay awake the whole night sick with what she had done because the trap cut both ways. Yes, it would force the poisoner into the open, but it would force the poisoner to kill, to stop being patient, to find a way fast to put enough poison into Holt to end it before the expert came. She had made her husband more valuable dead than ever before, and she had perhaps 3 weeks until the false thaw's penance ended and the pass sealed and the long wait for spring began. 3 weeks in which a desperate man would do desperate things. She got up before dawn and went to Holt's room and told him in a fierce whisper everything. The announcement. The look on Asa's face that she could not be sure of. The fuse she had lit. He listened. His clear eyes, his secret strength. The man getting well behind the mask of the dying. "You think it's Asa," he said. Flat. Not a question. And she could not lie to him. Not anymore. "I think," she said, "that when I said a doctor was coming, who would know everything, the only person at that table who looked afraid of being known was Asa." Holt was silent for a long, long time. When he spoke, his voice was the low, dangerous thing, the mountain behind it, but underneath the danger, she heard something that broke her heart, because Asa was his brother, his baby brother, the boy he had half raised. The one with all the words, the brightness in the house of silences, the one who held his hand and said, "Hang on, you're too stubborn to go like Pa did." "If it's Asa," Holt said slowly, Then he killed Pa. We don't know that. If it's Asa, Holt went on as if she had not spoken, working through at each word, a stone laid in grief. Then he sat by my bed, held my hand, told me to hang on, while the poison he put in my cup ate me from the inside. His jaw worked, and he meant it, Adeline. That's the thing. When he held my hand, he meant it. I'd swear it. He loves me. I'd have sworn on my life he loves me. Some men, Adeline said softly, thinking of her father, thinking of charm and debt and the same coat turned inside out, love you and ruin you with the same hand. They don't even feel the contradiction. It's how they live with themselves. Holt looked at her. You've known a man like that. I was raised by one, she said. And there it was again, the wall behind his eyes cracking a little wider, the two of them in the gray dawn light, each holding a piece of the same wound, the wound of having loved someone who could not be trusted, and seeing for the first time that the other one understood. He reached out and took her hand, not the way Asa had taken it at the table, not the spider touch. This was different. This was a man who did not have all the words reaching for the one thing he could not say. And she felt the strength in his fingers, the strength she had carried up the mountain in a jar day after day, and she did not pull away. When this is done, Holt said low, when we know, whoever it is, whatever it costs. He stopped, started again. I made you no promises in that letter. I'm not making you one now, but I want you to know that He stopped again, the words failing him the way words always failed him, and the failing was somehow the most honest thing of all. I'm glad it was you who came up that road, he said finally. Out of every woman in the world who might have answered that sorry letter, I'm glad it was you. Adeline's throat closed. Don't, she said. Don't say things like that. Not now. Not when I've just made it more likely you'll die. Seems to me, Holt said, that now is exactly the time to say them, while there's still a chance to. Outside the window, the warm, false wind had died completely. The cold was coming back hard down off the high peaks, sealing the valley shut for the rest of the long winter. Somewhere in the waking house, a door opened. A floorboard creaked. The bright, easy voice of Asa Brennan called good morning to Hetty warm as sunrise, and Adeline felt the fuse she had lit burning down toward its end. She did not know how many days she had. She did not know if the doctor's letter, even now folded in Ford's coat for the dawn ride down the closing pass, would bring help in time or only confirm a death. She did not know if the brother who smiled the most would find his careless moment before they found him. She knew only this, that she was holding the hand of a man she had come to love in a house with a murder in it, with the snow sealing them in and the clock running down, and that whatever happened next would happen soon, and would happen here in this valley with no way out. And she knew that she would not be quiet. Not anymore. Not ever again. Ford rode down the closing pass at dawn, and the waiting began. It was the worst kind of waiting, the kind with a clock in it. Adeline counted the days by the snow. Each morning she stood at the window and looked at the high white shoulder of the pass and watched it seal a little tighter, and she thought he made it down before it closed, and then she thought, but can he make it back? And then she made herself stop thinking, because that way lay madness. Ford would ride to the telegraph at the railhead. He would send the wire to Chicago, and then they had agreed he would not sit waiting for the answer in some warm room in town while she stood alone in this house with a murderer. He would send the wire and turn straight back, race the closing pass, and trust that the great Dr. Thorne, once summoned by a paid messenger, would come behind him in his own time. That was the plan. The plan had a hole in it the size of the winter, because the pass might close behind Ford and not open until April, because the wire might take days to send, and the railhead was far, and the weather was turning, and there was no guarantee on God's earth that Ford would beat the snow back up the valley, because she had sent away the one other person who knew the truth, the one other set of watching eyes, and now it was only her. Her and a man playing dead. Alone again. just when she had stopped being alone. She had not thought that part through. She saw it now. She had sent Ford for the doctor because the doctor was the bait and the proof both. But in sending Ford, she had cut their watch in half, and worse than half, because Ford saw things she missed. Ford knew the house and the men in a way she never would. She had made herself weaker to make the trap stronger. And the trap was very strong now. She could feel it. She could feel the change in the house, the way you feel a storm before it breaks, a pressure, a stillness, a wrongness in the air. Asa had changed. Oh, he was still bright, still easy, still full of stories. But there was something underneath it now, a tension, a watchfulness of his own. And twice she caught him looking at Holt's door with an expression that was gone the instant he felt her eyes. He had begun to volunteer for things. To bring Holt's tray himself when he never had before, to sit longer by the bed, to send Hetty off to rest kindly so kindly. I'll sit with him a while. You've done enough today, you go on. He was making chances. She saw exactly what he was doing because it was exactly what she would have done. He needed a moment alone with the dying man. He needed to add enough to the cup to finish it before the Eastern doctor came, and the kind brother sending the tired housekeeper off to rest was a kind brother making sure no one watched. She countered every move. When Asa offered to carry the tray, she was already carrying it. When he offered to sit, she was already sitting. When he sent Hetty off, Adeline stayed mending in her chair by the window, present, smiling, immovable. She made herself a fixture in that sick room. She did not leave Holt alone with anyone. Not Asa. Not Hetty. Not for a moment. Not for the length of time it takes to lift a cork and tip in a death. It was exhausting beyond anything. She did not sleep. She could not. Because sleep was a gap, and a gap was a chance, and she would not give him a chance. She catnapped in the chair with one eye open. She jerked awake at every creak. She began to look. She knew like the dying man's wife was supposed to look hollow-eyed and gray and worn to the bone, and the irony of it would have made her laugh if she had any laughter left. And Holt watched her wear herself away to keep him alive, and it was killing him by a different road. "You can't do this forever," he whispered one night. "You'll drop. You'll fall asleep, and he'll—" "I won't fall asleep, Adeline. I won't." But her voice cracked on it because they both knew she would. She had to. Nobody could go on like this. And the moment she did, the moment her watch broke for 1 hour, he would be there with his warm smile and his cork and his powder. "Ford will come back. Ford will come back, and we won't be alone. And if the pass is closed—" She had no answer for that. There was no answer for that. It came to a head on the 7th night. She knew it was coming. She had felt the pressure building all day. Asa had been restless, too bright, laughing too easily, and twice she had found him in the upstairs hall, for no reason he could name, just passing, just checking on things. And the third time she found him there, she had looked at him, and he had looked at her, and something silent and terrible had passed between them, and understanding neither of them spoke. He knew she was watching. She knew he knew. And they both knew the doctor was coming, and the snow was deep, and the game could not stay frozen like this forever. One of them would move first. That night, she meant to stay awake. She always meant to stay awake. She sat in her chair by the window with her mending in her lap and the single candle burning, and Holt breathing slow and even in the bed. His real strength banked down under the dying man's stillness, and she fixed her eyes on the door, and she meant to watch it until dawn. But she had not slept in 7 nights, and the body has its limits, and grief and terror, and the long carrying of a secret burn a person down to nothing. And the candle was warm, and the chair was soft, and her eyes were so heavy, so terribly heavy, and she thought, just for a moment, just rest them for a moment, just a moment. She woke to the sound of a cork, the smallest sound, a soft, wet pop in the dark, the sound she had been listening for 7 nights, the sound that had haunted her sleeping and waking. Her eyes flew open. The candle had guttered low. The room was full of shadow. And in the shadow by the bedside table, a shape was bent over the brown bottle of tonic, one hand on the cork. the other hand tipping something small and pale above the open mouth of the bottle. A little twist of paper, a powder, white as the snow outside, falling soft and silent into the medicine that was meant to save a dying man. For one frozen instant she could not move, could not breathe, could not believe it even now, even seeing it, even with the proof falling white into the glass. Then the shape straightened and turned its head, and the last of the candlelight caught the face, and it was the face she had feared and prayed against, and refused to fully believe the open, boyish face. The warm brown eyes, except the warmth, was gone from them, now scoured clean, and what looked back at her in the dark was a stranger wearing her husband's brother like a coat. "You're awake," Asa said softly, not alarmed, almost sad, as if she had disappointed him. "Asa." Her voice came out, a cracked whisper. "Asa, what are you?" "Don't." He set the bottle down, gentle, precise. The little paper twist disappeared into his pocket. "Don't do the part where you pretend you don't know. You've known for weeks. I've watched you know it. You're not as good at hiding as you think Addie. Or maybe I'm just better at seeing than the rest of them. We always were the watchers and the talkers. I talk so nobody notices I'm watching." She was on her feet. She did not remember standing. The mending had fallen from her lap to the floor. "You killed your father." It was not a question. It came out of her like something torn loose. And Asa flinched, just slightly. And for one moment, one terrible human moment, the boy was there again, underneath the brightness, and the grief all tangled, and his voice when it came was thick. "I loved my father," he said. "You killed him." "I loved him." Louder, insistent, as if the loving and the killing could both be true, as if she had no right to make him choose between them. "You don't understand. None of you ever understood. Holt was always Pa's, the eldest, the good one, the strong, silent one Pa was so proud of. And Ford had his place, the steady one, the one who could break a horse or fix anything with his hands. And me." His mouth twisted. "I was the youngest, the talker, the charming one, good for fetching brides and sweet-talking buyers, and nothing that mattered. Pa was going to leave it all to Holt, the whole place, everything we built, and give me a hired man's wages and a pat on the head. So you poisoned him." "I had debts." It came out flat, ugly. Gambling debts. A great deal of money owed to a very bad man named Silas Crane, the kind of man who collects in blood if he can't collect in gold. And Pa found out, and Pa said he wouldn't pay a penny, said it would teach me, said a man cleans up his own messes. Asa laughed, short and bitter. "Clean up my own mess with what? A hired man's wages. So yes, I made arrangements. Pa got sick. The doctor called it the cold in an old man's gut. And the will." He shrugged, and the casualness of it was the most horrifying thing she had ever seen. "Well, Pa never did get around to signing the new one that cut me out, so we split it 3 ways, and I told Crane he'd have his money come spring when the timber sold." "But it wasn't enough," Adeline whispered. She was piecing it together even now, even in her terror, the banker's daughter, who counted, who always counted. A third wasn't enough to pay him. A third was never going to be enough. Asa's eyes glittered in the dark. "Crane wants the land, not a payment. The land, the whole valley. And he'll have it one way or another, and I'll have a clean slate and a fresh start somewhere far from this freezing nowhere. But not with 2 brothers standing in front of it. Ford I can manage. Ford's gone down the pass like a good fool, and the pass is closed behind him, and accidents happen to men alone in the snow." He took a step toward her. "But Holt's the eldest. Holt holds the deed. With Holt gone and Ford gone, it all comes to me. And then it all goes to Crane. And then I am free." "You're insane." "I'm tired," Asa said. "There's a difference. I'm so tired, Addie. You don't know what it's like wanting out of a life this much for this long." He looked at the bed at the still shape of his brother in it, and something crossed his face that might have been grief or might have been nothing at all. He was supposed to be gone weeks ago. He should be in the ground by now, and then you came up that road, the little mail-order bride, the one nobody wanted, and you started carrying jars of water up a hill, and my brother stopped dying. His gaze swung back to her cold, now all the way cold. You did this. You're the reason he's still breathing. A girl I felt sorry for. A girl I was kind to. You were never kind, Adeline said. You were practicing. That landed. She saw it land. His face hardened to stone. It's a pity, Asa said. It really is. Because I did like you. But a wife who knows is no better than a brother who's in the way. And the snow's deep, Addie. And accidents happen. A grieving woman, half mad with sleeplessness, wandering out into the cold one night and never coming back. Who'd doubt it? Poor thing. Lost her husband and lost her mind. He reached into his coat, and the thing that came out of it was not the paper twist of powder. It was iron and oiled steel, and it caught the dying candlelight along its barrel, and he leveled the Colt at her across the dark room, calm as still water. I'm sorry, I am, for what it's worth. Adeline did not move. She could not move. Her body had turned to ice to stone to the frozen ground outside, and the black mouth of the pistol was the only thing in the world, and she thought absurdly of Mr. Tate and his spectacles of all the years of being small and quiet, and afraid of how she had come 2,000 miles to a valley at the edge of the earth to die in the dark at the hands of a smiling man, just as she had always somewhere deep down expected to. No. Not this time. Not quiet. Asa, she said, and her voice did not shake. It astonished her that it did not shake. There's one thing you got wrong. Is there? You said Holt should be in the ground by now. She lifted her chin, met his cold eyes over the steady barrel. You said the snow's deep and accidents happen. You said nobody's watching. She took a breath. But you're wrong about who's lying in that bed. And behind Asa, the bed moved. Holt Brennan rose up out of it like the mountain itself standing up. Not a dying man, not a wasted shadow. A man who had been eating clean broth and drinking clean water and banking his strength in secret for a month. A man 32 and broad as a barn door, rising silent and terrible behind the brother who had killed their father and meant to kill them all. Asa heard it. Too late. He started to turn the pistol swinging. And Adeline did the only thing she could do. The thing that was hers to do the thing no one could do for her. She moved. She did not think. There was no time for thinking. There was only the brown bottle of tonic on the table beside her. The poison, the proof, the white powder still settling in the glass, and her hand closed around it, and she flung it full force straight into Asa's face. The bottle shattered against his cheekbone. Glass and poison tonic exploded across his eyes, his open mouth, and he screamed a high, startled animal sound, both hands flying up the pistol, going wide, and in that half-second of blindness, Holt's great scarred hand closed over the gun and the wrist that held it and bent them both up toward the ceiling. The Colt went off. The roar of it was enormous in the small room, deafening, and a fist-sized hole blew through the plaster of the ceiling, and snow sifted down from somewhere above. And then Holt twisted once with all the strength his quiet wife had carried up a mountain to give back to him, and the pistol came free and clattered into the corner, and Asa Brennan was on his knees on the floor of the sick room, clawing at his burning eyes, sobbing, beaten, while his brother stood over him with the whole weight of 2 years of grief in his face. "Pa," Holt said. His voice broke on it. "You did, Pa." Asa could not answer. He was retching the poison tonic in his mouth, his eyes streaming. And the door burst open. Hetty in her nightclothes, a lamp in one hand and an old shotgun in the other, her face white as flour. And behind her, impossibly snow-caked to his shoulders, half-frozen, swaying with exhaustion, having ridden through the night, up a pass that should have been closed. Ford. I heard a shot, Ford said hoarsely, and then he took in the room, his brother standing alive and strong, the pistol in the corner, Asa broken and weeping on the floor in a slick of glass and stinking tonic, and his face did a slow, terrible thing. I sent the wire and turned straight back. Couldn't sit down there waiting on Chicago, not with him up here and you watching alone. Pass closed behind me an hour after I crossed. He stopped. He looked at Asa on the floor. It's him. It's him, Adeline said, and her legs gave out finally, all at once, the strength running out of her like water, and she sat down hard in the chair by the window and began at last, after 7 nights and 3 miles of snow and a month of carrying death and life up a hill in a jar to shake. They kept Asa in the root cellar after that. There was nowhere else. The pass was sealed. The law was 3 days of impossible snow away, and a man who has poisoned his own father and brother cannot sleep under the same roof as the people he tried to kill. So Ford cleared the stone cellar where the winter vegetables were kept, and they put a cot in it, and a lamp, and barred the heavy door from the outside, and they took turns carrying him food from the common pot, food. Adeline tasted first in front of him every time so that he would know they were not the kind of people he was. He wept those first days. Through the barred door, he talked, he raged and pleaded and bargained and wept again. And some of it was the boy they had loved, and some of it was the stranger in the boy's coat, and it was hard to tell through a stone wall where one ended and the other began. Holt did not go down to him. Adeline understood why. There are wounds a man cannot put his hand on, not while they are fresh. So she went instead, and she sat outside the barred door in the lamplight, and she listened because someone had to, and because she had learned long ago in St. Louis that even a monster is owed a witness to the truth of what he is. "You'll hang for Pa," Asa said to her through the door on the 3rd night, not angry, almost wondering. "When the snow goes, they'll take me down to the circuit judge, and they'll hang me, and Holt will let them. He won't lift a finger." "No," Adeline agreed. "He won't. You could speak for me. You're his wife now. He listens to you. I've seen it." A pause. "I was kind to you." "You were practicing," she said again gently this time. "I will tell the judge the truth, Asa, all of it. The fire and the debts and the spoon and what I saw you do with that paper. I will not lie to save you, and I will not lie to damn you. The truth is enough. It always was." She rested her head back against the cold stone. "That's the thing you never understood about this family. You thought the quiet ones were nothing. Holt and Ford and Hetty standing there saying so little while you did all the talking. But they were watching Asa the whole time, watching and remembering. And in the end, the watchers always see more than the talkers. You taught me that yourself. You just didn't think it could ever be turned on you." He had no answer for that. Behind the door, after a while, she heard him weeping again, and she stayed where she was until he stopped. And then she climbed the stairs and went to bed and slept, because the watching was shared now, and it was Ford's turn at the door. The doctor came in April. Dr. Ambrose Thorne of Chicago made the long ride up the valley once the thaw opened the pass for true, a precise gray man with a black bag and spectacles that mercifully reminded Adeline of no one. The wire had reached him. The fee had been generous. And so the great diagnostician arrived to examine a patient who was by then hale and brown and very much alive, splitting wood in the yard like a man who had never been sick a day. But Adeline had kept everything. The blackened spoon, the twist of paper Asa had dropped with its few grains of white powder still inside, and she walked Dr. Thorne through all of it calm and clear and exact. The banker's daughter laying out a ledger, and the doctor listened, and the doctor took the powder and the spoon and ran his tests with his own hands. The proper tests, the ones a country doctor had never thought to run, and at the end of it, he set down his instruments and looked at her over his spectacles with something close to awe. "Arsenic," Dr. Thorne said. "Arsenious acid. The inheritance powder, they call it, and well named for the use it's most often put to." He shook his head slowly. "Administered in small doses over weeks, it mimics a wasting sickness so exactly that 9 doctors in 10 would call it a gastric complaint and never look further, as your Dr. Larkin did, twice." He looked at the spoon, at the ugly stain blooming black across the bright silver. "But silver does not forget what flesh forgets, madam. You knew that. A trained physician forgot it, and a young wife from St. Louis remembered." He almost smiled. "I have ridden a very long way to tell you a thing you already knew. Your husband was poisoned. You are the reason he is not dead." And he confirmed it all in writing in his own precise hand, the great Dr. Thorne, his name and his reputation behind every word, so that no one ever could call it a jealous bride's invention. Justice did not come quickly. Things did not in that country in that time, but it came. The pass opened, and word went down the valley, and in time a United States Marshal rode up to Hollow Pine, a lean, weathered man with a star and a long memory, and he took Asa Brennan into custody without ceremony. There was no torture in it, no vengeance. Holt had wanted that first night. God knew Holt had wanted, but Adeline had stood in front of him with her hands flat on his chest and said, "This is not ours to do, Holt. If we become the thing that took your father, then he wins. We give him to the law. We let the law be the law." And Holt, who was an honest man, had let it be so. So Asa Brennan was taken down the mountain in irons to stand before a circuit judge. The trial was held in the back room of the general store, the largest room in Hollow Pine, with the circuit judge come up from the territorial seat and half the valley packed in to watch. Adeline went. Holt asked her not to, and then, seeing her face, did not ask again. He understood by then that she did not need protecting from hard things. She had carried harder. She took the stand in her one good dress, the same dress she had been married in, and she laid the whole of it out for the judge the way she had once watched her father lay out figures for a banker. Plain, ordered, each fact set in its place. The conversation by the corral, the way the old man had died, the food left on the plate, the 3 miles of snow, the spoon polished bright, laid in the tonic, the black stain blooming across the silver, and what she had seen with her own eyes on the 7th night by the light of a guttering candle, the white powder falling from a twist of paper into a dying man's medicine. She did not weep. She did not embroider. She did not once look at Asa sitting gray and small at the front in his irons, though she felt his eyes on her the whole time. When Dr. Thorne took the stand after her and confirmed it in the cold exact language of his profession, arsenious acid, the inheritance powder, the black and silver, the wasting that mimics a natural decline, the room went very still. And when the judge asked the doctor whether a competent physician ought to have caught it, Dr. Thorne looked for just a moment at Doc Larkin sitting white-faced at the back, and then said only that the poison was made to deceive, and had deceived better men than the local doctor, and that the shame of it was a thing for the man to carry, not for the law to punish. Doc Larkin did not stay for the verdict. He left Hollow Pine that spring quietly before the thaw was fully done. No one ran him out. No one needed to. A doctor who has twice called murder a stomach complaint finds that the families he doctors look at him differently after and weigh his words and send to the territorial seat for a second man when someone takes ill. He was not a wicked man. He was only a man who had been certain when he should have been humble, and the valley did not forgive certainty of that kind, not after what it had cost. He hung his shingle somewhere far off. The story went where nobody knew. And Adeline, who might have hated him, found she could not summon it. He had been wrong, but it was Asa who had been evil, and there is a difference. And she had learned in St. Louis to keep the two apart. The jury was out less than an hour, and the rest of it came out in the slow unraveling that follows when one thread is pulled. The debts. The bad man named Silas Crane, who had ridden up that first night to the corral in the dark, who had set the timber yard alight to make his point, who held forged papers against the Brennan land, and meant to take the whole valley in payment for a dead man's gambling. Crane, too, the marshal took when the trail of it led to him, his false deeds shown for the lies they were before the same judge, the fire he had set sworn to by a dozen of the hands who had fought it. And Mrs. Pruitt, who had stood on a boardwalk and told a whole town that the mail-order bride had come for the timber and not the man. Mrs. Pruitt said very little that spring, when the story of what the mail-order bride had actually done came down the valley and up and down every street and into every kitchen in Hollow Pine. Adeline never spoke a word against her. She did not have to. The truth has a way of being its own answer, and the woman who had been so certain about a girl with nothing to her name found that season that her own name had gone strangely quiet in the town she had ruled. Spring came up the valley like a held breath let go. The snow drew back off the high shoulders of the pass. The river ran loud and brown with melt. The dark pines softened with new green at their tips, and the meadows below the house came up in a wash of color, and the long sealed valley opened its hands and let the world back in. Holt healed all the way. The brown came back into him, and the weight, and the old quiet strength, and a thing that had not been in him before, that none of them had seen in 2 years, or perhaps ever. He smiled more, not often. He would never be Asa, would never have all the words, and Adeline found she was glad of it, glad of his silences, glad of a man who said little and meant the whole of it. And one evening in May, with the light going long and golden over the green valley, Holt Brennan asked his wife to walk with him down to the river. He had something in his hand, folded papers. "I've had these drawn up," he said. He was nervous. It was the strangest thing to see this great calm man, nervous, turning the papers over and over, the way Ford turned his hat. In town, with the lawyer. Now the circuit's sitting again. What are they? The deed. He stopped, made himself say it plain the way he said everything one stone at a time. To the whole place, Hollow Pine, the mills, the timber, the land, all of it. He held the papers out to her. "It was in my name alone, the eldest, the way Pa left it." He swallowed. "I've had it changed. It's in both our names now, equal, yours as much as mine. Not a wife's dower, not a widow's third. Equal in law, an owner beside an owner. Whatever happens to me, whatever anyone says, this valley is half yours forever, and no man can ever take it from you or tell you you came here for the timber and not." He stopped. His jaw worked, and not for the right reasons, whatever those turn out to be. Adeline stared at the papers. She did not take them. "Why?" she said. "Holt, why would you?" "Because you saved it." Simply, as if it were obvious, as if it were the only arithmetic that made sense. "You saved me, and you saved Ford, and you saved this place, and you did it alone in the dark, when not one of us would have seen the truth in time. I owe you the half of everything I have, more than the half." He looked at her, and the wall was gone now, all the way gone, and what was behind it was plain in his weathered face for anyone to see. "But that's not the only reason." "What's the other reason?" "The other reason," Holt said, "is that I don't want a wife who stays because she's got nowhere else to go. I had that planned, you know, back in the autumn. A working partner, a fair arrangement, a woman who'd have a roof and a name and no cause to complain." He shook his head slowly. "I don't want that anymore. I want a woman who could go anywhere, who's got her own land and her own name and her own money, and could walk down that pass tomorrow and never look back, and who stays anyway." His voice dropped. "Because she chooses it, not because she has to. I would rather have 1 day of you choosing this than 50 years of you only enduring it." The river ran loud beside them. The light came down gold through the new green pines. and Adeline Calloway, who had come up that road in the autumn with everything she owned in one small case and a debt of $300, following her like a ghost who had braced herself to be a thing that was bought and used, who had decided once that love was for women with choices, and she had none, stood by the river in the spring light, and understood that she had just been given the one thing she had never in her life been offered, a choice. She took the papers from his hand, looked at them, her name beside his, equal in law, forever. And then she did not simply fold them away and fall into his arms. She looked up at him, and there was something steady and clear in her face, the banker's daughter who counted, who had learned the cost of letting a man do all the deciding. "Then let me say what staying means," she said, "because I will stay Holt, but not as a thing you've given a gift to, as a partner. Half the deed means half the voice. When you sell the timber, I am at the table. When a man like Crane comes with papers, I read them before anyone signs. The accounts are mine to keep, because I am better at them than any of you, and the school I mean to open is mine to run, and the women in this valley who have nowhere to go will have somewhere because I say so, and not because I asked your leave." She held his gaze. "I spent a year being small to survive. I will not spend the rest of my life being small to be loved. If you want me, you want all of that. An equal, loud, at the table. Is that the wife you're asking for?" Holt looked at her for a long moment, and then the rare, slow smile came, the real one, all the way up into the coffee-dark eyes. "That," he said, "is the only wife I'd have. I didn't write that sorry letter for a woman who'd sit quiet in a corner. I just didn't know back then that I was lucky enough to get the other kind." "Then I'm not going anywhere," she said. He took her hand before she could lower it, turned it over gentle in his great scarred fingers, and ran his thumb along the faded line on the inside of her forearm. The pale scar the ember had left, the night the timber burned, the night she had held his terrified horses to their work, while the fire roared at her back. "You earned this place," he said quietly, touching the mark. "In fire and in snow and in 1,000 jars of water up a hill. Nobody gave it to you. Don't ever let me hear you say they did." And she reached up with that same scarred hand and laid it against the rough, weathered cheek of the quiet man who had given her a locked door and asked nothing, and then given her half a kingdom and asked nothing, and asked only in the end that she be free enough to leave, so that her staying would mean something. And she kissed him there in the gold spring light by the loud, bright river, and the rest of what they were to each other belongs to them and not to us, and so we will leave them there with the valley green around them, and the long winter finally truly over. They built a life, an equal one. Ford stayed, of course. Ford would always stay, the steady one, the watcher, and in time the hatred he had carried for letting his father go unavenged loosened its grip and let him be, because the truth had come out at last, because justice had been done, because his brother was alive, and his brother's wife had a quick mind and a kind heart, and the house was not a house of silences any more. He sat at the table when the timber was sold, and so did Adeline, and the two of them between them drove a harder bargain than Holt ever had alone, and Holt did not mind it in the least. He had spent 2 years carrying the whole weight himself. He found he liked having hands to share it. Junie came up the valley that summer. The mail-order bride from the boardwalk, the one who had been sent back, the one Adeline had watched, beshamed in the street that first cold morning, and had never forgotten. Adeline found her through letters and brought her to Hollow Pine, and gave her honest work, and a roof, and a fair wage, running the household accounts under Adeline's eye. And Junie, who had also once been a woman with nowhere to go, wept the first night the way Adeline had wept that first night, from the sheer relief of being somewhere safe. And Granny Mayelle came down out of her sod cabin more often that summer, and after no longer quite so much a hermit, no longer quite so much a witch in the town's frightened telling, because the mistress of the Brennan place had said plainly to anyone who would listen that an old herb woman 3 miles up the valley had known a truth that a town doctor twice missed, and that wisdom does not check a person standing before it speaks. Adeline opened her school. Just a small one at first, in the long front room of the great house where the books were the books that had surprised her that first night. She taught the valley children their letters and their figures, and she taught the women too, those who wanted it, reading and reckoning, and the keeping of accounts, the banker's daughter passing on the one inheritance her ruined father had left her that no debt could touch. And she taught a thing or two she had learned from Granny Mael, the knowing of plants, the reading of sickness, the small green wisdom that lives in old women's hands and is so easily called witchcraft by those who never learned it. She taught the girls especially a thing she said to them plainly and often, that a woman should know the worth of what she brings to a table and should never let anyone, however kind, decide it for her. A child was born the next spring. A daughter, black-haired like her father, with her mother's level gray eyes, and Holt Brennan, who had so few words, held his daughter in his great scarred hands by the fire, and could not find a single one of them, and did not need to. The valley would be hers one day, hers honestly, hers and free, and she would be raised. Both her parents agreed to know her own mind and speak it the way her mother had finally learned to do. And on the long table in the great front room where the family took its meals, there sat a single silver spoon. Adeline had kept it, the one from Granny Mael's table, the one that had blackened in the poison tonic and told the truth that flesh forgot. She had cleaned it after polished the stain away until it shone bright as the day it was forged, and she kept it always on the table in plain sight, where anyone might use it. People asked her sometimes why she kept that one old spoon out when the good wedding silver stayed in its felt-lined case, and Adeline Calloway would pick it up and turn it in the light and look at her own face, curved, small, and clear, in the bright bowl of it, the face of a woman who had once been quiet, who had once been small, who had once been told what she was worth by everyone but herself. "This spoon told me the truth," she would say when no one else would. "It told me my husband was dying by a hand we all trusted. A long time ago, I learned that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who smiles the most. And I learned that silver does not lie." She would set it down gentle in its place at the table where no one ever again would have cause to fear their supper. So I keep it where I can see it, to remind me that the quiet ones are watching, that a person's worth is not in their standing, but in their truth, and that the truth, if you are brave enough to go 3 miles in the snow and look for it, will always, always come to light. And the fire would burn warm in the great stone hearth, and the valley would lie green and free beyond the windows, and the long winter would stay at last where it belonged, in the past, behind them, over